So I recently published a video about a camping trip I took with my daughter up in the mountains. And we were in a fairly remote location, and in the video it mentioned that I couldn't get the truck started. Now I got some questions about that, so I thought I'd make this a follow-up video because I think it's an interesting topic for any overlanders or remote campers to think about. You know, what sort of equipment should you be bringing, and what options do you have if you're in a remote location and your vehicle won't start? Now, just to put it into perspective, we were not in any life-threatening situation, but we had driven about 10 miles up this mountain, and an unexpected heat wave had rolled in, and we were in the direct sunlight without any shade, and it was really uncomfortably hot. And I stopped the truck briefly to take a look around, and when I got back into the truck, it just wouldn't start. Now, the last people we had seen were about 10 miles back down the mountain near the highway where we had turned off, and hiking that 10 miles back down in the heat of the day with my 13-year-old daughter in tow didn't seem like a fun plan. And when I tried to start the truck, I could hear an audible click, and that was a hint as to what was going on. But my first thought was, because it was such a hot day, I was running the fridge in DC mode, and I thought that maybe the alternator just wasn't able to keep up and run the battery flat. So the first thing I did is I grabbed this jump starter, which I keep inside the truck and charged at all times. I attached it to the battery, but it still wouldn't start. So I went ahead and grabbed my multimeter. I carry this in the truck as well. And I measured 12.7 volts at the battery, which is plenty. So the battery was good. The alternator was charging as it should. And so then I went ahead and checked all the terminals and connections at the battery and all the ground connections on the truck. Everything looked tight, and I didn't see any corrosion anywhere. Now, my wife knew approximately where we would be, but I thought this would be a great time to let her know the situation and give her exact GPS coordinates. Now, the problem is that the cell phone service is really spotty, and I tried a bunch of times, but my phone just couldn't connect. Now, fortunately, my daughter's phone was able to connect after a few attempts, so it's really great that we had two phones with us. So I let my wife know the situation, and I gave her direct GPS coordinates just in case we couldn't get the truck started again. Now, in terms of communications, I always keep a secondary device. This is a GMRS radio. It's just a handheld. It would be a lot better if I had a higher powered, hard-mounted one in the truck, but I don't have one of those yet. But this can still be useful because I know a lot of hikers and a lot of hunters carry these around, and it's just a good backup. Now, there were actually campers in the area that we could have communicated with. We just didn't know it at the time. And if these don't work, I have one more backup plan. I always carry this. This is a personal locator beacon, and this works on a satellite system. So even if you don't have any cell phone service or any campers or hikers in the area, you can use this, and as long as you have a clear view of the sky, this will work. But this is more for dire situations. You don't want to use this just if your vehicle is disabled and you're not in any sort of a life-threatening situation. Okay, so then I started to think about the components in the starting circuit, which includes, of course, the 12-volt battery and any cables, which also includes any ground cables that may be bolted into the frame or the side of the body, like this one here. And then next to the battery is the fuse box on this truck. I have a 40 amp J-case fuse. And then back inside is the ignition switch. And after the ignition switch, you have some means to detect whether or not the vehicle is in park or neutral, if you have an automatic, or if the clutch is depressed for a manual. Usually you'll just have a sensor for that. This truck actually has a module that plugs into the transmission. Then after that, you'll have the relay. You can see this one I've actually labeled. That's my starter relay there. And then down on the engine, you will have the starter assembly itself. So this is the solenoid, and then this is the starter motor. And then the starter motor will be attached to the engine flywheel to get it cranked over. So at this point, I had already eliminated the battery and the cables as a probable root cause. And the fact that I could hear an audible click down at the starter solenoid, that told me that the ignition switch, the fuse, the park neutral sensing circuit, and the relay were all probably good, which meant that the most likely cause was either the starter solenoid just wasn't providing enough current for the starter motor, or the starter motor was physically stuck. So at this point I was considering a few options. The starter motor and the starter solenoid are both electromechanical devices, and sometimes just tapping on them with a hammer or even a wrench or screwdriver may be enough to free things up and get it moving again. Now I have pretty easy access to this starter motor, and I always carry hand tools with me and WD-40. So a second option I was considering was to just remove the starter motor and see if I could free it up by hand and maybe spray some WD-40 on the shaft and the bearings to see if I could get it to free up that way. But what actually happened is that after the truck had a chance to cool off, it fired right up by itself without any further intervention from me. Now, I think that heat probably played a role here. You know, it was a really hot day. We were driving slowly up really steep terrain while carrying this heavy camper. And of course, the starter is mounted really close to the exhaust pipe. So I think everything was just really hot. And that motor or the solenoid probably has some bad windings. And when it gets hot, the electrical resistance increases, which means that the current capability decreases. In other words, it just didn't have enough oomph to turn that flywheel over until things got cooled off again. Now this is the old starter and solenoid assembly, and when I got home, I went ahead and replaced this one with a brand new unit. It was a very quick and easy job. It didn't take much time or effort. Now I did have the option just to replace the solenoid alone, but I wasn't sure if it was a bad solenoid or a bad starter, and the whole assembly only cost a little bit more than the solenoid itself, so it just made a lot more sense just to replace the entire assembly. And I'm pretty sure that this was the culprit because it's been about a month since I swapped it out, and the truck has been starting reliably ever since. And just for good measure, I went ahead and replaced the starter relay here. And I bought a couple of spares as well. As you can see, this truck uses the same relay in multiple locations, so it's good to have a spare or two on hand. And I also bought a spare of the other sizes of relays and a package of these J-case fuses. So if any of these components burns out in the future, I'll have spares. Now let's say you're in this situation, but you don't hear that audible click down at the solenoid like I heard. There are still a few things that you can try, and the easiest one is if you have an automatic transmission, shift down to neutral and try to start it that way. It could be that the sensing circuit, for whatever reason, isn't detecting the transmission in park, but it may actually work in neutral. And besides checking the battery and the cables, I also recommend carrying spare fuses and relays for the critical circuits like the starting circuit and the fuel pump. You know, these things are lightweight, they're cheap, they don't take up much space, and they're easily swappable in the field, so there's really no reason not to carry spares. And just in case you're wondering, it appears that the old starter motor had really ingested a lot of road dust over the years, and I'm sure that contributed to its failure. And that's just one of the downsides of buying a used truck from the Bureau of Land Management. So I hope this video was informative or useful in some way, or at least got you to thinking about what sort of equipment you might want to take or your options if you're in a similar situation. And if you found this useful, check out my channel. You may find some other videos you like there as well. And we'll see you next time.